scenario with powerful tornadoes, but no devastating storm surge, and 11 people killed. Millions of homes are without water and power as the storm left destruction in its wake. Also coming up, Israeli forces continue to bombard Gaza from above. 27 people died today in an airstrike on a shelter. And in the center of Lebanon's capital, 18 people killed as Israel reportedly targets a senior Hezbollah leader.
It's an octopus of terror. It's the head of the octopus, and we should not take anything off the table.
Tonight, a former Israeli prime minister tells me Iran's supreme leader could be targeted as the Security Cabinet meets to finalize action against Tehran. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening and welcome to Jerusalem with me, Yalda Hakim. Well, as we begin the programme tonight, Israel's Security Cabinet is meeting for the fourth hour in a row to decide how to respond to Iran's missile attack. Retaliation could be swift. This whole region has been waiting for this moment. We'll focus on what form any attack could take later in the hour. But I want to focus first on Hurricane Milton, which has now swept through Florida. Well, authorities warned it could become the storm of the century with surges more than 4 meters high. You'll remember one police chief told me last night that anyone who didn't evacuate should write their names on their bodies with a marker so they could be identified. Authorities now say 11 people were killed by the storm, but that the state avoided the worst-case scenario. Well, let's just have a look at this. The hurricane first made landfall at Siesta Key near Sarasota at around 8:30 in the evening local time, around 1:30 a.m. here as a Category 3 storm. The surrounding areas of Tampa and Fort Myers were also hit. 126 tornado warnings were issued as Milton was downgraded to Category 1 while it moved across the state. It's now a tropical storm over the Atlantic. Our US correspondent James Matthews sent us this report from Siesta Key.
Siesta Key is where the Gulf of Mexico meets land. It's where Hurricane Milton met Florida. This was the result. A storm surge combined with strong winds that left streets flooded and littered with debris. Chainsaws and generators give a soundtrack to the relief effort the morning after. It had been a difficult night in a deadly storm.
It was just bang, bang. You can hear it on the roof. You can hear it on the hitting the windows. So it was kind of like my girlfriend was definitely a little scared.
I was in a safe place in my house, so.
All right. What was the safe place in your house?
Bunkered down by like the closets in the hallway.
But that way, our houses are okay. And we're all healthy. We're all still alive.
That's the main thing.
That's the main thing.
This was how the storm looked barreling through Siesta Key overnight. And this was the city of Tampa. The force of the hurricane was something no one here had experienced before, even if its impact wasn't as bad as had been feared.
What we can say is the storm was significant, but thankfully this was not the worst case scenario. The storm did weaken before landfall, and the storm surge, as initially reported, has not been as significant overall as what was observed for Hurricane Helene right now.
Daylight brought news of fatalities, but there was good news on Tampa Bay. Good morning. You made it. We'd spoken to Joseph Malinowski, who defied advice to evacuate and stayed on his boat. He made it through the night. Scary?
No, it wasn't scary. I just sat here and watched TikTok all night.
There were rescues by boat.
Let me spin around.
This one of a 14-year-old boy.
Grab him. What?
Sorry. And there were near misses as trees were weakened by the wind. In the storm winds, a crane fell to the ground in St. Petersburg. And this was the scene at the Tampa Bay Rays baseball stadium, where the roof was ripped off.
I'm sad to see it happen, but look, I can't change it.
This wasn't Florida's first hurricane, and it wasn't Mike Mossy. We joined him as he returned home after the storm through a flooded neighborhood. The worry was the basement. Mike had left $1 million worth of vehicle, a Lola T163 and a Maserati with 100 miles on the clock, both ruined.
They're totaled.
Really?
Yeah, totaled.
Why?
Corrosion, salt water, takes out everything. Yeah.
Dare I ask how you feel?
You know, it is what it is. I can't change it. You know, and I did all the prep we could ahead of time, and nobody ever thought the last 2 hurricanes would be like this. So, you know.
So you've lost your Maserati and your racing car?
Yeah. No Goodwood for me this year.
As bad as all of this is, it could have been much worse. That's acknowledged by the authorities, who'd billed Hurricane Milton as a historic storm. It was another dreadful hurricane experience here, but it was the long, difficult night when Florida got lucky. James Matthews, Sky News, in Siesta Key, Florida.
Well, later in the programme, we'll examine the misinformation spread online before the hurricane made landfall. We'll speak to an extreme meteorologist who spent last night chasing the storm near Tampa, and explain the science behind the more than 120 tornadoes that ripped through the state. The state is facing a long road to recovery, and the hurricane season isn't over yet. Okay, but let's focus now on the situation in the Middle East and Gaza. Medical officials there say at least 27 people have been killed and 54 people injured after an Israeli strike on a school sheltering displaced people. It happened on the same day a UN inquiry accused Israel of crimes against humanity over the destruction of health facilities in Gaza. The IDF also announced 3 of its soldiers have been killed in combat in northern Gaza. Our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle has this report, which does include footage of those injured in today's airstrike.
The world's focus in recent weeks has been on Israel's invasion of Lebanon. But Israel's invasion of Gaza continues. Today, around lunchtime, an Israeli airstrike hit a medical clinic in Gaza City. Among the dead were 6 children.
We were just sitting in our rooms when it happened. The place is filled with children, women and children. That's it. You don't find adult men here. This is who Israel targets.
Another Israeli airstrike hit a school in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. At least 26 people were reportedly killed this time. Some of the children had been on the street outside selling sweets.
It's always like this. These are innocent people. They just call them terror targets, but these are civilians. They're peaceful. They've been displaced multiple times. We've all been pushed out of our homes and come here to die, and they just keep on killing.
The wounded, and there were at least 70 according to health officials in Gaza, were rushed to hospital. Israel says both strikes targeted Hamas, but the Israeli military hasn't shown any evidence to back up that claim. The death toll in Gaza has now surpassed 42,000. More than 90% of the population is displaced, many of them multiple times over. Ceasefire talks broke down a long time ago. The war is now into its 2nd year, and the only certainty is that more people will be killed. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
Well, we've been talking about Israel fighting on multiple fronts. Well, today the UN said 2 of its peacekeepers were injured after an Israeli tank fired on a watchtower at a UN base in Lebanon. And tonight, Lebanon's health ministry said 18 people had been killed in Israeli attacks on central Beirut. Well, let's get the very latest and speak to our international correspondent, Alex Rossi, who is in Beirut for us. And Alex, another deadly, devastating day. We saw the devastation in Gaza and, of course, more deaths in Lebanon, in Beirut. Just bring us up to date.
Yeah, Yalda, these are just preliminary figures that we're getting. 18 dead, more than 100 people injured in 2 Israeli airstrikes. It happened at about 7:30 in the evening in central Beirut, not really far from where our live position is. I saw a flash of light over those buildings there and then heard what sounded like a jet screeching, or perhaps in hindsight it could have been a missile going into the building. And then we saw very large plumes of smoke rising over that area of Beirut. Now, it's understood that the strike was aimed at a man called Wafiq Safed, who is a senior Hezbollah figure, an interlocutor for the group. He would have been a go-between between outside states and Hezbollah. He's on the US sanction list. He would have arranged the accusation goes contraband, finance, even weapons coming into the country. So an extremely senior figure. Sky News has heard from Hezbollah sources tonight, though, that he did survive. We understand at the scene where these airstrikes happened, it's pretty chaotic at the moment. Search and rescue is continuing. They're still looking for survivors within the rubble. But it's quite clear that Israel is maintaining its campaign of really trying to decapitate the leadership of Hezbollah. Now, whether it makes a difference to what's happening on the southern border with the resistance that's going on, we understand there have been extremely fierce clashes between Hezbollah fighters and Israel as the invading force tries to move further into Israel, is far from clear. Certainly, Hezbollah has a fairly delineated structure. Although you can take out its leadership and its leader, Hassan Nasrallah, it's a blow to morale. It's also a kind of blow in terms of the symbolism for the group. But in terms of the tentacles of how it continues to fight, well, they can act on their own and they can keep going. And it seems that they are maintaining resistance to the Israeli forces. But Israel says, you know, it will continue. And everything that we are seeing going on that southern border suggests that Israel's invasion is, in fact, expanding.
Alex, thank you so much for bringing us up to date on the situation there in Lebanon. Well, amid growing tensions today, our international affairs editor Dominic Waghorn was taken by the IDF to the border with Lebanon, where the Israeli troops launched their invasion. Have a look. Well, in the north of Israel, this small town that directly overlooks Lebanon and faced a barrage of Hezbollah attacks. From Metula, our international affairs editor Dominic Waghorn has this report.
On the ground. They say Metula is the most bombed town in Israel. You needn't be here long to find out why. The town has been bombarded like this for a year, surrounded on 3 sides by Hezbollah. Israel has closed this area to journalists throughout this war. We were among the first to visit under military escort.
We've been brought right up against the border with Lebanon here. That is the border fence there with those white pylons intercepting it along the hillside there. This is as close as Israelis have been prepared to bring journalists since their invasion of Lebanon began over a week ago. A sign perhaps of their confidence about the way that operation is going.
Since Israeli forces crossed this border, there's been heavy fighting just inside Lebanon for a week, with Hezbollah forced back from the border. The few Israelis left in this deserted town say their military shouldn't leave Lebanon until it's destroyed the enemy completely.
How long do you think the Israeli army should stay in Lebanon?
Until it will be quiet, until we will finish Hezbollah. I think we need to destroy Hezbollah, to finish them, to all the organization, and after that It will be peace, and it can be done.
Sounds like a long war.
Yeah, but we are strong.
Israel's invasion of Lebanon appears to be deepening, and its airstrikes are hitting targets across the country. Here in the Bekaa Valley today, many miles north. The UN today said its peacekeepers were struck too, injured when an Israeli tank shell was fired on their post. When it launched its invasion 10 days ago, Israel called it a limited operation that would end when people feel safe and can return to their homes.
Another alarm. OK. You have to go, Patch.
From what's going on the border, that seems a distant prospect for now. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Metula in northern Israel.
And we'll be speaking to Dominic a little later in the programme. Now, tonight, Israel's Security Cabinet is meeting to discuss how best to retaliate against the 1st of October missile attack by Iran. While many allies are calling on Israel to show restraint in its response, there are those here calling for the very opposite. Former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett told me earlier that all options should be on the table. That includes targeting Iran's nuclear program and the country's leadership, including the Supreme Leader. Well, the map here shows Iran's nuclear facilities and its air bases, which are spread across the country. These could become potential targets for an Israeli retaliation. The main atomic sites are the Natanz enrichment plant and the Bushehr nuclear reactor. Earlier, I sat down with Mr. Bennett to discuss his reasoning and what the potential consequences might be. Have a listen. Mr. Bennett, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. The world is waiting and watching to see how Israel responds to Iran's ballistic missile strike on Israel last week. What do you think they should do?
I believe that Israel should strike Iran's nuclear program and strike regime centers, and I'll explain why. The ultimate strategy that I believe that the world should have is to not allow to Iran acquire a nuclear weapon ever. And how do you do it? By accelerating the toppling of the regime. It will fall, and ensuring that in the meantime they don't acquire a nuclear weapon. So basically you need two efforts: to accelerate the toppling of the regime and to slow down the acquisition of nuclear weapons.
Does Israel have the capability, though, to do it alone?
Yes. We can strike and cause considerable damage. I don't know if we can destroy the whole program, but as I said, we have to delay it while we accelerate the pace of the toppling of the regime.
When you say toppling of the regime, I mean, is everything on the table?
Well,
should Israel go after the Supreme Leader?
Never before was one nation attacked by so many long-range ballistic missiles like what we had just a few days ago. Iran is the Islamic Republic of Iran, to be accurate. The regime, I'm separating it from the people. The people are an amazing people, the Iranians. But the regime is not really a regular regime. It's an octopus of terror. It's the head of the octopus, and we should not take anything off the table.
Including targeting the Supreme Leader?
Everything should be on the table.
The Cabinet is meeting this evening to discuss what to do about Iran. What would you tell them to do?
I would say we have the legitimacy more than ever. We have the ability more than ever. Iran is at its most advanced point in history. It's acquired uranium in an amount for 10 nuclear bombs. This is crazy. They're building the bomb already, the bomb itself. So we're in the 11th hour. I would say strike the nuclear facilities, strike the regime. Don't be afraid. The Israeli nation stands behind you.
This is despite caution from the Americans.
That's correct.
Is this you saying to the Americans, look, you may have asked us to have ceasefires, you may have asked us to, strike in the way that, as President Biden said, is proportionate to the strike that Israel faced by Iran?
So should we shoot thousands of rockets on Iranian citizens like what they did? Is that the proportional? Should we send Israeli soldiers to go and rape Arabs because that's proportional to what was done to us? If we did what was proportional, it would be the most horrendous attack, because what's been done to Israel over the past year is crazy. So it's much less than what they did to us. because Iran, through its tentacles, raped, burnt families, kidnapped people, shot thousands of rockets on Israel. We're not going to do that to Iran. What I think we need to do is take out its nuclear program and its regime.
Let's talk about Gaza, because the international community has been divided in the way in which Israel has handled the conflict there. We have seen over now 42,000 people have been killed, 97,000 people have been injured. Gaza
half
is under
of which
rubble.
are terrorists, half of the
But 16,000 of them were children.
Well, I want to be very clear here. The sole responsibility for death of civilians in Gaza is Hamas. That's because their whole system is based on placing their rockets against Israel within the citizens. If they stop using their own people to kill us, they'll stop killing their own people. They are the murderers, not Israel.
But what we've seen over the course of a year is international condemnation. Allies of yours, the United States, the UK, France, Germany, these countries coming out, and they've stood with Israel for decades, and now they're saying Israel has gone too far. When you say that, destroying Hamas or reaching some kind of victory, even if they are launching 1 or 2 rockets, they're still launching rockets. They're still there.
They are. I think we need to prosecute this faster and stronger than we've done. I will say this, however. Israel is fighting a war on behalf of the world against the craziest, most fanatic jihadist ideology and terrorists on earth. We are fighting Iran on behalf of the world, because imagine that Iran acquires a nuclear weapon. Europe's going to be under fire. I think the world should be applauding Israel for fighting these forces of evil and not stand aside and keep on criticizing the very people who are fighting for the world's future, the freedom of the world.
When you look at how Israel has decapitated Hezbollah, 2,000 people have died in Lebanon, over 1 million people have been displaced. But when you have wanted to target people in a very precise and lethal way, you've been able to do that.
Sometimes you're able to do it, sometimes you're not able to do it. But the whole line of questioning is wrong, because you're asking us, who have been attacked out of the blue on October 7th by thousands of terrorists that murdered our children, burned families, raped women, Hezbollah, who killed dozens of Israelis over the past year. They should be asked, why are you doing this? Why are you killing Israelis? Why are you killing your own families by using your home in a cowardly fashion? If we let them get away with it, let me be as clear as possible. They're going to do this in the UK. They're going to do it in New York. They're going to do it in Paris. They're going to use citizens to hide behind. This will become the world's plague. Israel is fighting your war. And instead of sitting on the side benches and giving us criticism all day, the world should back us in defeating this horrible, savage terror.
So just finally, if I can just be clear, you believe everything should be on the table, the nuclear sites, the targeting of Iranian leadership?
I believe that we need to do everything in our ability to accelerate the toppling of the Iranian mullah regime and free the people, and everything to delay as much possible as we can Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. And everything should be on the table.
That was Naftali Bennett speaking to me a little earlier today. You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim, live here in Jerusalem. Still to come on the program. US President Joe Biden tells Donald Trump to get a life as the political row over misinformation around Hurricane Milton intensifies.
And now it's coming from both sides and it's moving this way.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat is seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world.
I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
The biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
it got us then. There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits coming in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news.
Clearly not had very much to eat at all. A lot of them extremely thin and very frail.
Look at her arms. I can put my entire hand round. This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Mother Nature can be vicious, absolutely savage. The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa! Close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to the programme. The full impact of Hurricane Milton is still emerging, but the Florida governor says it was not the worst-case scenario that had been feared. The storm surge was up to 5 feet, which is less than the surge during Hurricane Helena. Here's our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, on what we know so far.
Hurricane Milton was powerful and destructive, but was a long way from the storm of the century. Did forecasters get it wrong? Well, in short, no. What worried them most was how Milton grew. This reconstruction of the developing storm, based on satellite data, shows how it intensified from a Category 1 to a Category 5 hurricane in less than 24 hours, one of the fastest ever recorded. Rapid changes like that worry forecasters because they're hard to track. Then add in warm seas that give hurricanes power. This is the average temperature of the ocean in the Gulf of Mexico, and this year temperatures have been well above that. And don't forget, ahead of Milton was a highly unusual outbreak of tornadoes with huge destructive power. At least 19 were recorded along the front margin of the storm, and here in red, the highest number of tornado warnings ever for Florida. The wind shear caused by the coming storm, combined with warm, wet air being carried by it, hitting cooler air over the land, triggered these twisters and 200-mile-an-hour winds, massively increasing the damage caused. But the greatest risk from the hurricane was a storm surge, and there Milton, fortunately, failed to deliver. As it made landfall, 120-mile-an-hour winds drew water away from Tampa Bay and then piled it up here between Sarasota and Fort Myers. The peak storm surge forecast was up to 15 feet. For context, that's 4.5 metres, more than twice my height. But the tide gauge data shows little more than 5 feet along the worst affected coast. So did forecasters overestimate the risk? Not really. Remember, 24 hours before landfall, Milton was still a Category 5 hurricane. Its track, almost perfectly forecast days in advance, took it directly to the Tampa Bay area and more than 7 million people. Evacuations probably saved many lives, even from this less powerful storm. And only 2 weeks ago, the conversation among experts was around why the number of hurricanes this season had been below average despite record warm oceans. Now that's all changed. With Helene and now Milton, there have been 9 hurricanes, 4 of them major, and 31 days of hurricane activity, are well above average season. A warming climate is making storms grow stronger, faster, and hurricane seasons potentially harder to forecast. And with 6 weeks of the season left to run, there may be more to come.
Tom Clark reporting there. Well, the city of Sarasota was expected to be hit directly. Let's speak now to Mayor Liz Alpert. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. I mean, it was being described as catastrophic yesterday and the hurricane and storm of the century. But now we're hearing that the worst case scenario has luckily been avoided.
That's true, Yalda, and I appreciate you having me on. We're so relieved that it wasn't the hurricane of the century and didn't have those 15 feet storm surges. We did have a slight storm surge, but nothing like that. And actually, it seemed less than Helene a couple of weeks ago, and people were still recovering and digging out from that. But this became a huge wind event. So it did hit Sarasota directly. It came on shore at Siesta Key, which is one of our barrier islands, and then came right across Sarasota, and then, of course, the rest of the state. So we have tons of trees that have been toppled and tree limbs. And I think you showed a picture there of Tropicana Stadium that was in St. Pete, that the roof came off, but we've had awnings down. We're without power in a lot of the city and the county. So we still have a lot of recovery to do. So now we have the recovery still from the storm surge a couple of weeks ago, and now this huge wind event.
Yeah, I mean, tell me a little bit more about that, because while, as you say, the worst has been avoided, we did see the evacuation of 5.5 million people. And of course, the aftermath of this, I imagine most of the area is without power and you know, obviously all the devastation.
Exactly. It's a good thing that so many people did evacuate. I think that's why we didn't have such a loss of life. It was because of that. So I'm glad people did. I hope the next time, since this didn't end up being this as much catastrophic event as everybody was predicting, that then the next time they'll still take it seriously, because you don't know which time is going to be the catastrophic event.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you speak to, the meteorologists, they say that it just seems to be getting worse and worse. Mayor Alpert, thank you so much for joining us here on the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, joining me now from on the ground in Florida is storm chaser Kyle Cutton. Thank you, Kyle, for joining us on the program. You decided not to leave. You have done this before, though. Just tell us what it was like to be sort of in the actual storm.
This hurricane, unlike the 11 prior to it, had characteristics that I had never seen before. And to answer your question, it was a deceptive one. The northeast eye wall didn't hit as hard as it typically did, but the southeast eye wall, which you saw tear apart that stadium, hit much harder than I've ever seen a hurricane hit.
And what was it like? I mean, obviously you've done this before. What does it feel like, and how do you prepare for something like this?
Well, inside the hurricane, the pressures are so intense on your head, it causes intense headaches. I carry body armor that I put on in situations where I have to get out and help people. And like last night, we had a couple that was without gas on the highway, and we had trees breaking and flying all around us. And it's always intense when you're in those situations.
Did you regret staying on?
Nope. I absolutely would do it all over again the same. We just now left a damage site where tornadoes, as the gentleman before me said, a record amount of tornadoes. We just left an area that I've never seen tornado damage from a hurricane like I've just seen today.
Are you worried, though, about the risk of this? We were just speaking to the mayor there, who said, you know, people were lucky this time round because it wasn't as bad as expected, but it could be the next time. Are you worried about not being able to survive one of these?
Me personally, I'd like to think my experience has got me in a place that I can make decisions to stay alive. It's always unpredictable, and you never know when your last chase is going to happen. And so I would agree with the mayor that I think they did it right. I think they did the evacuation. You can't gamble with lives of those that are not experienced in this kind of weather.
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, if you could, how do you prepare for it? How do you build the experience of something like this? Because you're taking on nature.
It's a great question. My first 1.5 canes I spent inside of a parking structure of solid concrete. And then I realized that there were people that needed help during the hurricane. And from that, I drew upon the experience of being able to go out and offer aid and assistance. And then the aftermath, like we've been through today, that's when you really see where people need the most help. The storm survivors, after it's done, they lose everything. They're barely lucky to get out with just their life. So it's something I've learned in my travels to try to help people with.
Kyle Cutton, fascinating talking to you. Thank you very much for joining us here on the program.
Thank you, Yalda. You have a great day.
You too. Well, there's been condemnation in the United States towards a small group of Republican politicians who spread misinformation around Hurricane Milton. President Biden described their actions as un-American. Well, it comes as false information and conspiracy theories about the hurricane spread on social media channels. Democrats and even fellow Republicans have called out a handful of right-wing politicians who've shared the misinformation online. Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene even seemed to suggest the government had created the storm. The Congresswoman posted, yes, they can control the weather. It's ridiculous for anyone to lie and say it cannot be done. In response, fellow Republican Congressman Carlos Gimenez said, newsflash, humans cannot create or control hurricanes. Anyone who thinks they can needs to have their head examined. Well, the online discussion, including around compensation payments, had led to a direct response from US President Joe Biden earlier today. Let's just have a listen.
But Mr. Trump and all those other people know it's a lie to suggest that's all they're going to get. That's bizarre. It's bizarre. They got to stop this. They're being so damn un-American with the way they're talking about this stuff. Mr. President Trump, former President Trump, get a life, man. Help these people.
Will you hold him accountable? You said you were going to hold those accountable.
Public will hold them accountable. You better than the press hold them accountable because you know the truth.
President Joe Biden there a little earlier. Well, let's bring in our Mark Stone, who joins me from St. Petersburg in Florida. Mark, you could hear the frustration there in Joe Biden's voice. They've described this storm as a life and death situation. They were describing it as unsurvivable. And of course, you're dealing with the politics around this as well.
Yeah, of course. And, you know, in your introduction there, you described the misinformation Republicans as a small group of Republicans. Yeah, maybe, but they are a very influential group leading right the way to former President Trump himself and indeed his surrogate, Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, a man who wields a huge amount of power on social media. So you could see why President Biden has been so frustrated, why the FEMA administrator has said that she has never known conspiracy theories like them. Let me show you where we are at the moment. We're in St. Petersburg, and this is one story of many lucky escapes that have come across this region over the course of the past 24 hours. You're looking there at a crane, and you can see the building that it hit just there on the right-hand side. That crane fell from all the way up at the top there of this building that is under construction. Have a look at that. That is a long, long way that the top portion of that crane fell. Nobody injured as a consequence of that, which is remarkable and extremely lucky. And you can see what's left of the crane in the side of the building there and at the bottom as well. I was listening to your interview with the mayor a little earlier on. She was making the point that, yes, one reason why the number of people to have died in this is thankfully so low is because many people did heed the warnings, did decide to evacuate. I guess the problem with that, and we've heard it as we've been travelling up and down the coastline today from Fort Myers further south here where we've seen pockets of damage, but no massive structural damage. The problem that people have told us is some people feel like this is crying wolf. I mean, the mayor was talking about if you stay, you will die. Well, people did stay and they didn't die. And so next time, a proportion of them may think, and indeed have told us, we're going to sit the next one out. And as the storm chaser said there, every hurricane is different. They behave differently. Even if you think they're going to be an absolute whopper, when they come in, they tend at times to behave somewhat differently. I think the story of the past 24 hours is a very lucky escape for the people of Florida.
Yeah, but as you say, incredibly risky, because people who were told, their homes would turn into coffins suddenly did stay, and that didn't happen. Really important point there because of this sort of the danger of these storms and hurricanes. Mark, thank you so much. Well, you're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim, live in Jerusalem. Still to come on the programme, President Volodymyr Zelensky has been in London pitching his victory plan. But how far are Western allies going to back him?
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back to the programme. Ukraine's president was in Downing Street today, where he presented details of his so-called victory plan to the Prime Minister. Volodymyr Zelensky is pushing allies for permission to use more weapons, including UK-supplied Storm Shadow missiles, to hit targets within Russia. So will he get what he wants? Earlier, our Security and Defence Editor Deborah Haynes spoke to the new Secretary-General of NATO, Mark Rutte, who also attended the meeting inside Number 10. How far is he prepared to go in backing Ukraine?
Armed with what he's calling a victory plan, Ukraine's president stops off in London as part of a rapid tour of European capitals.
Today I want, of course, to share with you details of the victory plan. We count on you. Have a trilateral meeting.
Also in town and invited into Downing Street is NATO's new chief.
It's so good to have you here so early on in your tenure.
Speaking to Sky News afterwards, the former Dutch Prime Minister declines to divulge details about Ukraine's plan to repel Russia's invasion, but he says he hopes victory comes as soon as possible.
What is clearly the case is that we have to continue supporting them so that Zelensky, his team, Ukraine as a whole, is in a strong position one day to, when they decide, enter into what form of negotiations.
A key request by Ukraine has been permission to use Western long-range missiles against targets inside Russia, something that the UK and other allies have yet to grant.
Is it making Ukraine weaker, the fact that they haven't agreed this yet?
I'm not sure it is, because there is this risk that we completely focus on one weapon system. The main issue here is making sure that the military aid continues to flow into Ukraine, and then one weapon system will not change the outcome of the war.
And do you think that allies should listen to Vladimir Putin when he's clearly threatened that should this permission be given about the long-range weapons, that it would escalate? He'd see that as direct NATO involvement in the war. Should allies listen to Vladimir Putin's saber-rattling?
No, they shouldn't, and they don't. NATO is strong. We can face any adversary. We have everything in place to make sure that NATO is safe, is secure, and that we can fight off any threat. And we will never be intimidated by anyone outside NATO trying to threaten us. So that is of no use. He could better stop that.
Against the backdrop of Russia's threats, NATO allies are about to start an annual nuclear exercise with aircraft, but no actual munitions.
What message do you hope that this nuclear exercise that NATO is taking sends to Moscow?
It is crucial that we test and strengthen our defence. We also clearly send a message to our adversaries that we stand ready to basically be able to respond to any threat.
Obviously, NATO is not currently playing any role in the Middle East crisis, but that is clearly a big crisis consuming the world. And NATO allies, individual allies, are involved in helping to defend Israel, for example. Would you consider a possibility that NATO might have to play a role in the crisis to defend Israel's skies in the event of a direct war with Iran?
Well, here, first of all, I would like to go back to my predecessor who said NATO cannot solve everything. So NATO is really concentrating on the North Atlantic, on Canada, the US, Europe. So we cannot solve everything. And clearly, NATO allies are very much involved in trying to navigate this crisis. And it is a crisis. So many people are losing lives on both sides, on three sides, in Gaza and Lebanon, but also of course, also Israel. Take only a look at what happened on the 7th of October, and there are over 1,000 people killed without any reason. Because of this terrorist attack which happened on the 7th of October. So it is a humanitarian disaster what is happening there. And of course we follow that closely, and I'm really happy for the fact that our allies are very much involved in trying to, as best as possible, navigate that crisis.
The US and British spy chiefs have raised the alarm about what they described as a reckless campaign of sabotage by Russian intelligence officers across Europe. How worried are you, as the new NATO chief, of the threat posed by Russian intelligence officers launching sabotage attacks, arson, murder on European soil? And what is NATO doing to counter that and to deter it?
Of course, we have to take hybrid threats very seriously. And indeed, the spy chief here in the UK gave a commanding speech, I could say, and a very authoritative address he had. I think it was yesterday. I read it. And of course, we have to be aware of this. And this is something which we coordinate within NATO, the hybrid threats, also, of course, at the level of the individual allies, but also collectively.
The biggest threat right now is to Ukraine. Here, a Russian strike on President Zelensky's hometown of Kryvyi Rih. This country isn't yet a member of NATO, but it'll be hoping its allies have the strength and stamina to achieve Ukraine's vision of victory. Deborah Haynes, Sky News.
Well, tonight, Israel's Security Cabinet are due to meet to discuss how to retaliate against Iran's major missile attack on the 1st of October. Well, our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, joins me now live from Tel Aviv. Dom, it's good to see you. The War Cabinet has been meeting for some time now, trying to figure out what their plan is. And there are many in this country who have all sorts of ideas, including the former Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett. I spoke to him a little earlier, and he said, frankly, everything should be on the table, including taking out the nuclear sites and the Iranian leadership.
Well, frankly, Yalda, this entire meeting is shrouded in secrecy. We don't even know if it started yet. We actually don't know which city it's happening in. Is it going to be at the Kiryat, the sort of security headquarters of Israel in Tel Aviv here, where I am, or is it going to happen in Jerusalem? Has it started already? And I think that gives a sense, really, of the gravity of the situation. We have to stress that the Middle East is approaching another potentially very grave turning point, because Israel is trying to work out how to react to two unprecedented events, those two ballistic missile and drone missile attacks carried out by its arch enemy, Iran, the first ever attacks, direct attacks by Iran on Israel. The first retaliation by Israel to that was regarded as token under American guidance to take the win, as Joe Biden put it to the Israeli leadership. There is consensus here now that Israel has to respond with much more force to that ballistic missile attack. But there is not really consensus on how to do so. As you say, there are hawks on the kind of right of the political spectrum. Former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett sort of foremost amongst them, who are saying this is the moment. Israel will never have as good an opportunity to strike what it fears most, which is that alleged nuclear weapons program that Iran is believed to be fostering and nurturing deep underground in Iran. It will never have an opportunity where Iran's allies, Hezbollah and Hamas, are so weakened, and where the regime itself is weakened by years of unrest, crushed but still massively weakening the Iranian leadership. So this is the moment to strike that, and that is what Bennett is saying. But others would say, well, actually it's counterproductive to do so, because that could lead to the country rallying around the supreme leader, who Bennett actually suggested in your interview should possibly be assassinated. That shouldn't be ruled out by Israel. But also this could encourage Iran to go hell for leather developing the bomb. Even Bennett admitted that Israel may not be able to destroy that program completely on its own. I think it's understood by most military experts it would require American support, which is clearly not forthcoming. Joe Biden publicly warning Israel against doing so. So there are others who say that maybe Iran should be, or Iran's oil facility should be struck by Israel, and others that say its military target should be struck by Israel. The IRGC barracks, the intelligence headquarters, are the symbols of the regime that may then hasten the toppling of that regime. So there's a whole range of things the Israeli leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, will be considering tonight. We expect some kind of action in the coming days, probably not the next couple of days. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement in the Jewish calendar, makes it less likely we'll see action then. But in the days after that, probably we'll see retaliatory action. And I think the character of that could determine the immediate future of the region, and also some time after that as well.
Yeah, I mean, for the last few weeks, you and I have been talking about the fact that this it is a dangerous moment for this region, and this could further escalate that into an all-out confrontation, something the Americans are desperately trying to avoid, although they've been, other than issuing statements of concern, they really haven't put the sort of pressure that it was expected on Israel.
I think the fear for the Americans, but also other allies as well of Israel, is that you could end up with a situation where Iran escalates things further. Say its oil facilities are attacked or its nuclear facilities. It could then strike the Emirates over the Gulf, the Persian Gulf. That could draw in Saudi Arabia possibly to their aid. You could see this escalating into a much worse situation. Now, that could undermine Israel's successes against Hezbollah and Hamas. So it's being urged to act with restraint, but within there is a lot of pressure to take real force against Iran.
Tom, thank you, as always, for all of your analysis there. We'll be watching all the developments very closely here from Jerusalem. It started off this week with a very somber memorial for the victims of October the 7th attacks. But even as the country paused to remember those killed and taken hostage, Israel's war has continued. And we've seen that in places like Gaza. The evidence just today, 27 people killed in a strike on a school being used as a shelter in Gaza, and 18 killed in a strike on the center of Beirut tonight as well. Israel's reasoning is that it is targeting the command structure of Hamas and Hezbollah. But of course, civilians are also dying. We'll be, as I said, continuing to watch all the developments. But for now, good night.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.